everyone. Welcome to our Zoom meeting. As you know, we are embarking on our fourth day of CMHA's Mental Awareness Week. And for those who are joining us today, this is another great individual that I've had the honor and the pleasure of knowing over the last couple of years. And she is from York Region. And our offices, we've been working very close together. So welcome, Rebecca. Rebecca Shield is the CEO of the Canadian Mental Health Association, York Region and Simcoe branch. So, Rebecca, welcome. And I'll give you the floor for you to introduce yourself and talk about the amazing work that your organization, especially you're doing around mental health.
Well,
Welcome.
thank you so much, MP Johari, and thanks to all of the listeners and your constituents who are sharing this time with us today. It's such a pleasure to be able to talk about mental health during our Mental Health Awareness Week. And our theme this week, of course, is get real about our emotions. We're talking a lot about mental health these days because of the pandemic. We're all experiencing it. And then we're all looking at, those who are, disproportionately impacted and how we can support those ones. And whether it's parents that are calling me worried about their children, or we're going to talk today about, our seniors. We all want to talk about mental health. We all understand that mental health is health. And so it's such a pleasure to have this conversation. The Canadian Mental Health Association, serving York Region South Simcoe, is a broad community-based mental health and addictions organization. We serve all kinds of people. We serve those who have serious and persistent mental illness with multidisciplinary teams, helping people get well and recover in their community. We do a lot of housing programs and support people who are homeless to find permanent housing in a housing first model. And we work with our partners, which are both all levels of government. We have special programs that support the mental health of newcomers with our newcomer well-being program that we do in partnership with the welcome centers to make sure that people who have gone through a migration experience or are having challenges are supported. We also deal with a lot of people that are struggling, that are dealing with mild to moderate depression, anxiety, worry. That's pretty much all of us. And we have a wonderful program called Bounce Back. It's part of the Ontario Structured Psychotherapy Program. And of course, it's a free cognitive behavior therapy. It's delivered over the phone, and it's easy to access for people that just aren't feeling themselves and want immediate access to care. But we've got over 31 programs, and we encourage anybody, of course, who is really struggling or knows someone who's struggling to reach out, because that's what we're here for. Is we're here to support the mental health of our community. And maybe we'll talk a little bit more about specific populations, but we've been around a long time and we're here for the community. So let's get started on the conversation.
Yeah, thank you. That was great. Great intro of what you and your organization does. You spend a lot of time talking about the organization. Tell me about your passion among all of those. Which one of those services? I know you oversee all of them, but from a passion, I know that you may have some special interest group special group that you're very much interested in.
It's a wonderful question, and one that I don't get asked very often. So I've been in what I like to call the social profit sector my whole career. And I worked in the downtown east side and saw people that were very marginalized by severe addiction. I worked in developmental disabilities and disabilities such as deaf, blindness, and of course I've been in mental health now almost 14, 15 years in my career. And the thing that has struck me is the impacts of mental health and then the impacts of stigma, and thinking about those two interrelationships. And we talk about mental health and mental illness. And I've always said, medication and our trains, we can treat the mental illness, we can treat the symptoms, but mental health is a home, a job, a friend. That's a life worth living. That's purpose. That's how we connect. And more, I started thinking about the impacts of those who experience a mental health issue, the impacts on them and the impacts on their family. And a lot of times people say, Rebecca, it's almost the stigma and the isolation that comes from the experience that's even harder to deal with than the mental illness itself, because I've got, a great doctor, a great team. And I really started thinking about the impacts of loneliness. And now, MP Johari, more and more I'm really thinking about what does loneliness look like and what does it feel like and what are the impacts. Now, I started doing this thinking before the pandemic hit. And now the pandemic has really brought that into focus. And so what do I mean by loneliness? Now, you know that we all experience times of loneliness in our lives. All of us are going to, maybe we go off to college or maybe we've gone through a life transition. But we call that episodic loneliness. But when we move from episodic loneliness into a chronic state where we really don't feel that we have any connections that are of value or are valued, it actually is an incredibly important health and social issue. Chronic loneliness. So maybe you take a step back. Why this matters to me is that it affects everything. People understand loneliness and they understand what happens when you're not connected. Human beings are hardwired for connection. We need it to survive. In fact, the research says that it is the same as food and water. So if you don't eat, you know you get malnourished and you know your body degenerates. You know if you don't drink, you get dehydrated. And then all of a sudden, you know, your body deteriorates. If you don't have connection, because we need to, how human species came about, it's equivalent to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. Your immune system, your all of your factors actually begin to degenerate. And when you look at studies that have both come out of Alberta Health and Ontario, it is the #1 reason that seniors will end up in a hospital and stay in a hospital, not the condition itself. And so it's a major issue for me. And the more I think about it and the way that loneliness impacts people broadly, it's now become my passion that I want to eradicate chronic loneliness by 2050. That's because I think when I look at the population of homeless people or newcomers who've gone through migration, or I look at youth who go to university in that high risk period, and I look at what chronic loneliness does in isolation, it's a risk factor for suicide. It's a risk factor for anxiety and depression. So I really want to change hearts and minds and have a world where we all belong.
I can say this is truly your passion because
Yes.
your facial expression, your hand gestures, all of those actually changed when we started talking about loneliness. You even blushed, right? You went red on screen. So thank you. Now let's put loneliness in the concept of or in the light of let's get real. So how can we talk about the theme of this week is let's get real. So let's put loneliness and let's get real together and see, which population, as you know, we have youth, we have seniors, we have, families, and we have single professionals, and there are various populations that deal with loneliness. But let's talk about a little bit about, let's say, one of the group, whoever group that you feel more passionate about, and let's get real. And I'll leave it up to you because you're doing such a great job being passionate about loneliness. So I'm sure you're going to pick one of these population that you're most passionate about.
It's it's so hard for you to say that pick one, because what I see is how there are themes around loneliness, and yet we all experience it differently. And of course, we all experience, as I said, we're all going to experience times of loneliness. And what we know is that the isolation of the pandemic, we've all experienced it. When we look at seniors, maybe we'll talk about seniors for a moment.
Yeah, I think they're hit the hardest because even the youth through the social media and through their phones and through some of their colleagues, they may have a network, but seniors, I believe seniors may have been impacted probably a little bit more than the youth.
It's true because, although I really want to say many organizations have ramped up to try to get seniors technology. And as you said, with youth, maybe some of them had it or were more facile with it before. But, we saw those devastating stories of seniors in long-term care homes, looking at their families through windows, these connections that are so important. The interesting thing about loneliness is it's not quite the same as social isolation. We can be socially isolated and not feel lonely, or we can feel lonely and not be socially isolated. But they're interrelated. But what the pandemic really exacerbated was the fact that people couldn't connect. And especially in this time of distress, and it went on and on and on. And so for seniors, we started to see a whole bunch of issues that came up. And with seniors, it's a time of transition in their lives where, they begin, especially as they become older seniors and older adults, they maybe begin to lose their spouses or close friends and their networks. Their children, if they may live at home with their children in some communities, and in some people, they live separate from their children, and their children can live far away. And so as they find that their networks are getting smaller, they can often feel very lonely, and again end up in a hospital because they don't have that support. We know that seniors who have really strong connections, they feel valued, and let's really talk about belonging, have a strong sense of belonging, because belonging is really the antidote to chronic loneliness. And so what does belonging look like? And why is it important? Belonging is really a combination of a couple of things. You have to have the connections to begin with. So if you don't have connections, then that's the problem. And when we talk about what does that mean, you have to have the connection. Well, they have to exist, and you have to be able to get there, right? You have to be able to get transportation, or they need to be in the language so that you can attend, all of those pieces, right? So you have to have the connection, you have to be able to get there, and it has to be safe and in a culture that's inclusive and welcoming.
Mhm.
But then there's that you and I could go to the same thing. You could walk away saying, gosh, that was great. I met everybody. I love everybody. I could walk away and say, gosh, I was really drained. I really felt like we could go to the same thing and have told. So then there's the individual experience around that. Right. And that individual experience. And what we know about belonging is when you attend something and it gives you purpose and it gives you a sense of well-being or satisfaction, right? So belonging is a combination of strong value connections that give you purpose and well-being in life. And so with seniors, they could be somewhere, but they may not feel like they have purpose to that. So when they begin to engage in activities, whether it's seniors or anybody, they engage in activities where it's meaningful to them.
Mhm. So what we could do to help them? So I mean, I try to call my mom on FaceTime once every other day, or kind of surprise her during different times by doing sending little care packages or love messages, but how more in general we can help our seniors.
So I want to talk about this. There's an individual level which you're talking about, which is how do we reach out to those that we love and are connected to. And of course, we know that it's around concentric circles, and where family can be a very core concentric circles. But I also want to say what we've also learned from the data is young entrepreneurs might feel that their concentric circle is more around their peers and their friends. They have stronger connections there because of their age, right? And we know that. But family is core. It can be your spiritual community, particularly for newcomers and seniors. That could be a critical part. So seniors that haven't been able to attend a place of worship that they've done for a long time can be very distressing, because that's where they had a sense of purpose and belonging and well-being, a spiritual fulfillment. Very important. So when you ask, what can I do? I always talk about a couple of things. First of all, what we in the data was so interesting. This is like that kind of
Well,
blew
tell
my
us about the
mind.
data.
Well, so one of the data pieces, and I'll tell you that and I'll go back, but one of the really interesting little tidbits is you can't think your way out of loneliness, because it's like water and food. It's not like you can turn around and say like, oh, I'm not going to think about being lonely today, because you either have it or you don't. Chronic loneliness, not episodic. But what can happen is the one thing that seems to, across all populations, make a difference is volunteering, being able to be there and help someone else out. So the idea that, you may not be able to, because you're in a state of chronic loneliness, feel that you're worthy of asking for help. It may be too hard. But if your neighbor says, hey, do you think you could help me move my garbage cans? And you go and you do that, and then you get that purpose, and you feel like you've done something nice for somebody, and somebody's asked you for something and you were able to do it, then actually is such a hugely important aspect. And so when I think of some of the federal programs around the seniors funding, and it talks about seniors and volunteering and engagement and well-being, I think there's a lot to that. And so sometimes it's not asking the senior that you're calling that you love and care about, hey, what can I do for you? But maybe it's saying, I really miss hearing about this story. Could you help me by doing X, Y, and Z? Maybe you could tell me the story of, well, how did you, in your day and age, what did you do when you know, when the lights went out or something, so that they can feel like they're giving back, and that sense of value and worthiness that we all want to feel, because that's a beginning, right? That's the connection. And my own little personal story is, when I moved into a new neighborhood, when I moved back to Ontario from British Columbia, the way I connected with my neighbors, I had babies and I had asked for help. And all of a sudden, because they could come over and they looked after my kid for 15 minutes where I had to run and get diapers, that started the relationship, because I vulnerably asked for help. And then they came and said, "Oh, Rebecca, can I have a cup of milk?" And and that's how we started, by being able to be there for each other and create those strong connections. And I have wonderful connections. And so when we think about belonging and strong communities, that's what we want to build. And when we lift ourselves up at that social and policy level, what does it mean to have inclusive communities? What does it mean to welcome our neighbors? What does it mean, and how do we create those structures of accessibility and affordability so that people can attend events? And those things are so important, because that drives better health outcomes and
That's
better well-being
awesome.
outcome. Yeah,
Wow.
thank you.
Wow. 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 I love it. We've never had that type of conversation. All our conversations have been focused around a lot of community activities and how we can support. But that was very interesting.
Thank you.
Social inclusion. That's great. Let's talk about another group that is often appreciated, but we don't talk about them. Often enough, and we don't thank them enough, and we don't recognize them enough, in my point of view. Caregivers.
Yes.
Let's talk about the caregivers. And first of all, I want to acknowledge the caregivers and the first line respondents, and all of those who are helping us at the forefront of this pandemic, day and night. All the professional, all the doctors, the nurses. I very much like you, I listen to watch the news, because we live in a bubble from, like, I'm on 8 o'clock in the morning until 8 o'clock at night, or 9 o'clock at night, in this legislative bubble, and talking about these programs, etc. But when you get home and you want to reconnect back to the to the world, you watch the news and you see doctors in tears, you see nurses in tears, you see caregivers in long-term homes in tears, you see some of the emergency workers in various supermarkets, or in tears, and they're tired, they're stressed, they're worried. I just think of nurses that they come to an environment and then they go home, and I still have that picture in my mind, that the individual actually lived outside of her home, in a little camper, to be able to protect the family, because it was at the earliest stage of COVID-19, and they were in the forefront. Let's talk about them and how we can support them, and what are your thoughts on that. And just want to once again acknowledge them and appreciate them.
Well, thank you. This is an absolute trauma, and we have to use that language, that our frontline healthcare workers, our emergency responders that have been on the front lines of this, have been disproportionately impacted. And particularly in the hotspots, it's relentless. And people are dying in front of them, and in very difficult and scary and disproportionately quick ways. And they are, we've called them heroes, and they are, but we know from past pandemics like SARS and other things that this is going to end up affecting them, because you cannot undergo that level of stress and that without impact. We are, everything is like, it's a reaction. It's you have to be able to come down from that, from shock and from all of this stuff. And so we absolutely know that we have to care for their mental health and help them build the resilience and recover from this. And we have to be thinking today about how we support all of the people who are on the front lines, including, as you said, those who have been in our grocery stores, those who have been delivering our packages, those who have been in our food plants, those who have been, all the things that have allowed some of us to stay and work at home, that have had to come in to keep us safe.
Mhm.
And if they have experienced COVID themselves, or they are on the front lines and healthcare workers, they're more likely to experience a form of post-traumatic stress disorder. And from there, the data is that they're 60% more likely to end up experience depression or an anxiety related issue.
Mhm.
And so we need to have the resources in place to support those people, because burnout is real. We all know what it feels like. The mental fatigue that some of us are feeling, jumping from Zoom call to Zoom call, is nothing compared to the emotional toll, that the stress, the cortisol, the stress that's like in their bodies that, has amped them up. And so we really want to think about that. And our gratitude is appreciated, but we need resources in place so that they can have some sort to deal with the post-traumatic stress disorder. So
Mhm.
we need both ways of building the resilience and ways of helping them cope with those feelings. And that can be through really known strategies like cognitive behavior therapy. It can be other forms of counseling and support, and to ensure that they have the resources that they need. And we need investments today so that we're there and ready for when they need us.
Yeah, that's for sure. I mean, I with the peak on wave three, and our ICUs and our hospitals being, being taxed to the max, as far as spaces and beds are available. I don't want to be in a position of a doctor who has to make a decision whether we want to admit this patient or another patient. It is
Right.
just like I still remember watching an episode on CBC that they were talking to the doctor, and the doctor was quite stressed and saying, like, you know what, my training is all about saving people, and I don't know how to make a decision about, picking between patients that I need to treat. My job is to treat all the patients, but it's not fair for them to be put in that position to be able to, you know, uh, make decisions like that. It's I'm sure that's stressful. I'm sure that they would go back and think about, hey, look, did I make the right decision, or how would I be able to live with that decision? I don't know. It must be very, 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 very difficult. I want to acknowledge them. Um, what supports Canadians in general? Let's bring it down. I mean, we've talked about loneliness, we've talked about various population, but at the end of the day, we acknowledge you talked about healthy living, and you talked about the social network, and you talk about truly belonging, and the role that the families and friends can play. All of that is great, but let's talk about one or two, as I call it, tips and tricks that would be able to help, general population, regardless of the age, regardless of those couple of disciplines that we need to put to build that resilience that you talked about. So we can walk away with say, oh yeah, okay, I'll do this.
Sure. So, I love this question. So, my top, what are your top 3 or 4, tips or tools or tricks for people? I always start off with the one that I think is most important. This is my opinion. Sleep. Absolutely. If you're not sleeping, you got to pay attention to that. And if you're not sleeping and you're worried and you're up all night, if you're having trouble falling asleep, if you're waking up in the middle of the night, really sleep is core to our well-being and our ability to manage our emotions. And so all those things around good sleep habits, around not being on your phone in the middle of the night, and the things that you've heard about, pay attention to that stuff. Get into a sleep routine. Whether that is, I'm going to be in bed a half an hour before without my phone, and I'm going to read a book, or I'm just going to calm down. Don't drink too late if you're using alcohol. Don't drink too late because that's got a lot of sugar in it. You know, don't eat too late. So get focusing on sleep. Because sometimes when we focus in on the basics like sleep, a healthy diet, making sure that we get outside and breathe some fresh air, all of that stuff, especially getting out in nature. I always say, look at trees. We know the data tells us that when we get out and we can look at trees, that'll help us feel better. But for those people who say, you know what, Rebecca, that's great. Okay. Like I'm not myself. I'm not myself. I can't get out of bed. I'm really struggling thinking. I'm finding myself yelling at my children. I'm agitated. I'm stressed. I feel like I'm going off. Then you kind of say, hey, I'm not myself. That's okay. It's totally normal. This is part of undergoing stress. And so that's when I want to encourage you to say, you know what? Good for you for recognizing that you're not yourself anymore. And so let's reach out and get some help. And I talked about the bounce back program at the beginning of this, and I'm going to bring it back to that because here is something that's delivered over the phone. There is no wait list. We can get you in. There's a few weeks that we have to process, but we can get you in to start looking at how to manage mood and anxiety and stress related disorders and worry. So we can have that conversation with you because we all might learn how to do other things, but we often don't learn how to manage that ongoing thinking that, oh my God, I can't stop that thinking. I'm up all night thinking. There's things that we can teach you and help you learn, just like you learn how to go to the gym, just like you learn how to cook. Let's learn some mental health tricks, and bounce back is wonderful for that. And then if it's more serious, then let's get you into an intake and get you the support you need. And whether you go through your family doctor or you call the mental health, and for any Canadians, there's Canadian lines, but you know what, go in and get some support because you know what, that's what we're here for.
Yeah.
Because mental health is health, and you wouldn't wait if you were coughing to get bronchitis to get pneumonia. Let's not wait
Yeah.
from feeling down to then a much more serious problem, because mental health is a health issue. So if we can get in there early, we can treat it easier, and then we can have a quicker and more resilient recovery. So let's do that together.
For sure. I'm going to have the staff reach out to the office and get the program name and the phone number and and
Absolutely.
the link so people could reach out. Well, Rebecca, it's been great. It's been great. Thank you very much. And we learned a lot. It gives us a lot to think about. Really, a couple of good takeaways. And it seems the theme of sleep well, eat healthy, live healthy, make sure you have a strong social group. And you talked about doing little things to help people will make you feel good. You talked about helping somebody take their garbage out, or it's just during this time, especially for seniors. So those are good. And also the fact that now we have a link, and we have an organization, and we have support out there. It really helps us to make sure that we continue this conversation, because you know what, we put we put a lot of effort during this week to talk about it and to destigmatize it. But this is not something that finishes at the end of this week. And tips and tricks like that, as well as you know um, uh, contacts like that, will help us as we move forward, and we see these signs, to be able to kind of get the support that we need. Any closing remarks that you have before we thank you? And
Sure.
uh,
Thanks.
go ahead.
Thank you. Well, first of all, MP Johar, I want to thank you. You have been a passionate leader and advocate for mental health for your community. And I've been working with you for years, and you connect people, you promote the conversation, getting people talking about it. So your leadership has been inspirational, and you're such a wonderful partner. So thank you to you, and for having this dialogue and making Mental Health Week important for your community. So thank you for that. It's such a pleasure. The last thing I want to say to people is, Mental Health Week is great. We also have the CMHA event, Mental Health in Motion, where we can all come together to get active and to raise dollars for those people who need extra supports. And so if you're putting up some tags, I'd love you to put up mental health emotion, where our community comes together for youth mental health and for other essential programs and services for those that are so vulnerable, because that's when we give, we can make a difference. So maybe we can all come together, because I know I'm going to be out there in June, and hopefully everybody else can join me.
Absolutely, we'll be there, and thank you for your comments, especially the closing comment.